Hey everyone, Israel is currently in a war against the terror organization Hamas, and we know how hard it can be to keep up with all the news. So if you haven't had the time to stay on top of the latest developments out of Israel, we're here for you. I'm Ladarga Velazi, and this is ILTV's Weekly Review.
As the conflict escalates on multiple fronts, Prime Minister Netanyahu shared a public message directly to the Iranian people that went viral in the Iranian community with millions of views within hours, where he called for regime change in Iran and emphasized Israeli support for the liberation of the Iranian people.
When Iran is finally free, and that moment will come a lot sooner than people think, everything will be different. Our two ancient peoples, the Jewish people and the Persian people, will finally be at peace. Our two countries, Israel and Iran, will be at peace. When that day comes, the terror network that the regime built in 5 continents will be bankrupt, dismantled. Iran will thrive as never before. Global investment, massive tourism, brilliant technological innovation based on the tremendous talents that exist inside Iran.
And U.S. President Joe Biden, Vice President and presidential candidate Kamala Harris, and former President and presidential candidate Donald Trump are all giving Israel advice on which target it should or should not strike in Iran. All gave clear statements of support for Israel's right to retaliate for the over 200 ballistic missiles fired by Iran at Israel last week, but sharp differences on tactics. More from ILTV's Steve Leibovitz.
It would be expected that potential targets of an expected Israeli retaliatory strike on Iran would only be discussed behind closed doors and in strict secrecy. But this is presidential election season in the U.S., and the current president, vice president, and former president all made their views known. Vice President and Democratic presidential candidate Kamala Harris wants Israel to ensure the safety of Iranian civilians.
As I have said, I will always ensure Israel has the ability to defend itself against Iran and Iran-backed terrorist militias. My commitment to the security of Israel is unwavering. And let us be clear, Iran is not only a threat to Israel, Iran is also a threat to American personnel in the region, American interests, and innocent civilians across the region who suffer at the hands of Iran-based and backed terrorist proxies.
President Biden advised Israel not to attack Iranian nuclear sites, and in his latest public comment, he advised Israel against hitting oil fields. He also advised Israel against meddling in U.S. politics.
The Israelis have not concluded what they're going to do in terms of a strike. That's under discussion. I think if I were in their shoes, I'd be thinking about other alternatives than striking oil fields. No administration has helped Israel more than I have. None. 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 And I think Bibi should remember that. And whether he's trying to influence the election or not, I don't know, but I'm not counting on that.
Former President and Republican candidate Donald Trump told Israel to go for the nukes.
They asked him, what do you think about Iran? Would you hit Iran? And he goes, as long as they don't hit the nuclear stuff. That's the thing you want to hit, right? I said, I think he's got that one wrong. Isn't that what you're supposed to hit? I mean, it's the biggest risk we have. Nuclear weapons, the power of nuclear weapons, the power of weaponry. But when they asked him that question, the answer should have been, hit the nuclear first and worry about the rest later. And that's what they should. If they're going to do it.
Tensions between the U.S. and Israel are rising once again as questions loom about Israel's response to the Islamic regime in Iran. On Wednesday, Prime Minister Netanyahu refused to allow Defense Minister Yoav Gallant to visit the U.S. and conduct meetings with U.S. officials until Netanyahu himself speaks with President Biden. Gallant was set to meet with his counterpart in the U.S. and discuss Israel's planned response for an attack on Iran. But surprisingly, the topic still has not been discussed between the two heads of state. Prime Minister Netanyahu has been waiting for President Biden to call for 10 days to discuss this same topic. Trust between the two nations is strained as a byproduct of Israel not sharing information on strikes prior to attacks. For example, the pager attack on Hezbollah. Meanwhile, the Islamic regime in Iran has threatened to escalate further if Israel strikes key sensitive sites such as oil fields, a strike that could cripple the Iranian economy and make a weak Islamic regime even weaker. The Israeli response to the regime's ballistic missile barrage will likely include regime intelligence sites, military bases, but not the controversial nuclear program sites. On Tuesday, the regime warned a strike on infrastructure such as oil fields would be a red line and would impact the severity of the regime's next strike. President Biden has also urged Israel to consider other options and has stated he does not support striking the nuclear facilities. Throughout the day today, Israel has faced multiple heavy rocket barrages, including one of 25 rockets in the lower Galilee area and another of at least 85 missiles targeting Haifa and Akko, with dozens of the rockets being intercepted and others falling in the area. A school was damaged in the attacks by one of the missiles, and a residential building was damaged in the north as well. One elderly woman in Haifa was injured lightly in the attacks. IDF has expanded its presence in Lebanon to 3 full divisions and launched massive waves of airstrikes while ordering more Lebanese civilians to evacuate for their safety. More from ILTV's Steve Leibowitz.
The IDF is expanding the military operation in South Lebanon, increasing deployment to 3 full divisions. Currently, the 98th and 36th divisions are in Lebanon, and Division 91 has now been added. The deployment in Lebanon is expected to reach 5 divisions, the maximum deployed earlier in Gaza. Israel's raids in South Lebanon have focused on Hezbollah's centers of gravity in South Lebanon villages, where troops have so far found massive amounts of weapons. The army announced that 2 Israeli reservists serving in the northern border were killed in a mortar attack amid the swiftly widening offensive against the Hezbollah terror group. The deaths bring the IDF toll since launching its ground offensive in Lebanon to 11. Meanwhile, the Air Force completed a large-scale aerial operation. 100 Air Force fighter jets attacked Hezbollah sites for an hour in massive strikes on Hezbollah infrastructure. More than 120 terror targets were hit, including a rocket array and Hezbollah's intelligence headquarters in South Lebanon. The IDF issued new calls to Lebanese civilians in more than 24 villages and towns in South Lebanon to evacuate immediately and head north of the Awali River. Heavy rocket fire has been pounding northern Israel. Barrages of missiles have targeted Haifa and the Upper Galilee during the past 24 hours, leaving damages to homes and causing fires in open areas. Remains of Hezbollah rockets shot down by air defense fell in numerous communities. Rocket fire from Gaza and a single rocket fired from Yemen targeted Tel Aviv and set off alarms, forcing residents of greater Tel Aviv to shelter. The rockets were shot down or fell in open areas, and only minor injuries were reported.
לפני שעה קיבלנו פה דיווח על נפילה במרחב חולון. רקטה שנורתה מעזה, נפלה פה בשטח פתוח, ללא נפגעים. אחרי סריקות פה בשיתוף פעולה עם המשטרה, כיבוי אש ועם מד"א, ללא נפגעים. יש נזק קל מרסיסים במרחב.
In recent days, the Home Front Command has stiffened instructions in some areas. Alerts are still rare in the center of the country, but for Haifa and northern residents, the Hezbollah attacks are now a daily event.
Hamas still fired rockets at our civilians, not in the north, not in the south, here in central Israel. They managed to land rockets in a central community where the rocket hit right outside of the front door of this family's home. Unfortunately, there were 2 individuals who were lightly injured, but because they listened to the instructions of the Home Front Command and the Israel police, they were only lightly injured.
Now, the north of Israel has been under a continuing barrage of rocket fire from Hezbollah throughout the day. Haifa, Carmel, Akko, and other towns and cities in the Galilee are being targeted throughout the day. ILTV's Devo Klein has the latest.
Hezbollah has been firing at the Carmel and the western and upper Galilee. This after Hezbollah fired more than 100 rockets at the Israeli port city of Haifa and surroundings. The ongoing shelling has been the heaviest yet on Israel's 3rd largest city. Most of the rockets were intercepted by the Iron Dome system, although some got through, exploding in the Haifa suburbs of Kiryat Yam and Kiryat Motzkin. A woman in her 70s was wounded in the arm by falling shrapnel.
מספר הנפגעים הוא ממש קטן, לאור התנהגות נכונה של התושבים. פיקוד העורף מחוז חיפה יחד עם ארגוני החירום, כב"ה, מד"א ומשטרה הגיעו למוקדי הנפילה על מנת לאתר לכודים, לפנות פצועים ולטפל באירועים.
The skies above the city have been filled with white trails of the interceptor rockets rising to meet the incoming barrages, and explosions as sirens wailed and hundreds of thousands of Israelis ran for shelter.
Prime Minister Netanyahu sent a message directly addressing the Lebanese people. In his message, the Prime Minister blamed Iran and Hezbollah, claiming that they led the Lebanese into this war, and urged citizens that the time was right for the Lebanese people to rise up against the terrorists that brought them such great suffering. Let's hear his message.
We've degraded Hezbollah's capabilities. We took out thousands of terrorists, including Nasrallah himself, and Nasrallah's replacement, and the replacement of his replacement. Today, Hezbollah is weaker than it's been for many, many years. Now you, the Lebanese people, you stand at a significant crossroads. It is your choice. You can now take back your country. You can return it to a path of peace and prosperity. If you don't, Hezbollah will continue to try to fight Israel from densely populated areas at your expense.
After weeks of pounding by the IDF, Hezbollah is separating its actions from Gaza for the first time and is calling for a ceasefire with Israel unrelated to the continuing war in Gaza. The call came with 3 IDF divisions advancing in South Lebanon and continuing waves of airstrikes of Hezbollah leadership and missile firing capabilities. More from ILTV's Steve Leibowitz.
Appearing shaken and unsure, Hezbollah Deputy Leader Naim Qassem said the group supported the efforts of Speaker of Parliament Nabi Berri, a Hezbollah ally, to secure a ceasefire, without providing further details on any conditions demanded by Hezbollah. Until now, Hezbollah has insisted that it will continue firing at Israel until a ceasefire is reached in the war in Gaza. Israeli analysts say that with so many Hezbollah leaders killed and wounded, the group is becoming desperate for a halt in fighting. This ceasefire call from Hezbollah came as IDF operations in South Lebanon continue to advance. The 98th Division killed 200 Hezbollah members this week, demolishing terror tunnels and capturing weapons in several Lebanese towns near the border. More than 100 tons of explosives have been used by the division to demolish Hezbollah sites above and below ground. The Air Force bombardments continue with waves of attacks on Hezbollah leadership in Beirut and rockets and rocket launchers in the Bekaa Valley.
יש פחד, יש בהלה, יש בריחה, יש שחיקה של ארגון חיזבאללה שהיא בסדר גודל אחר. הארגון הזה לא חווה אף פעם דבר כזה.
The IDF said it destroyed a Hezbollah tunnel that crossed into Israel, but had no exit point. According to the army, the tunnel crossed the UN-recognized blue line by about 10 meters. No Israeli towns were under any threat by the tunnel. Massive amounts of weapons have been recovered from what appear to be normal homes in South Lebanon.
המלח הזה היה מכוון לתושבי הצפון. הוא פה בהישג יד מיידי, הוא גם מאוד חדש, משמע שכל המלח הקודם שהיה להם היה בשימוש, ובעצם עכשיו מצאנו את המלח, סיכמנו פה אופרציה של החיזבאללה, אנחנו פה כדי להגן על התושבים של מדינת ישראל ולהחזירם לצפון.
Marking a year since its attack on Israel, Hamas issued a defiant propaganda video promising more attacks while threatening the safety of Israeli hostages. The tape release came amid reports that Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar is alive and has renewed contacts with Qatar.
According to several media sources in the Arab world, Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar has reestablished indirect contact with Qatari mediators. There had been no contact reported with Sinwar for several weeks, and there was growing speculation that he could have been killed in an Israeli bombardment in Gaza. Senior Qatari diplomats are now saying that there have not been direct contacts with Sinwar, but there have been negotiation efforts through senior Hamas political figure Khalil al-Khaya. Meanwhile, the Hamas armed wing, defeated in the battlefield after a year of war with Israel, managed to release a defiant propaganda video marking the October 7th massacre and threatening the fate of 101 Israeli hostages still held in Gaza.
إلى نفق مظلم ومغلق ومؤجل إلى أجل غير مسمى. أي ربما يكون 100 درون أراد جديد يلوحون في الأفق. ليكون ذلك أكبر علامة فشل استراتيجي وأخلاقي للعدو في تاريخه.
Ron Arad was an Israeli navigator whose plane was shot down over Lebanon, and he is missing since 1986. He was held by terrorists. He is presumed dead, and the location of his body unknown.
1 year after the October 7th terror attack, and 101 hostages still remain in captivity. Among them, Guy Gilboa Dalal, who was taken captive by Hamas from the Nova Music Festival. Joining us today is Ilan Dalal, Guy's father. Thank you so much for joining us. So it's been 1 year since the day that Guy was kidnapped. What is your feeling today, on this day, 1 year later, that Guy is still being held hostage in Gaza?
Well, for us, the families, the whole last year was one ongoing, never-ending nightmare. We just live in constant fear all the time. To get the phone call with bad message, and we know that Guy is in the tunnels right now as I speak, in a dark tunnel with no food, water, clear air, sunshine. We saw the footage of the tunnels where the 6 hostages were murdered, and likely the other hostages are in the same condition. And it's very, very, very hard to think about it and to know that someone you love is being held in such bad condition and there is nothing you can do to help him.
And when was the last time that you heard any news about Guy, had any indication of his well-being?
The last time was about a month before the last rescue of the 4 hostages from Gaza. And we got a sign of life, but I don't know what it means because they didn't tell us exactly what this sign of life means. They just say that he's alive. So we know that he was alive about 5 months ago. And a month later, the IDF rescued 4 hostages from Gaza. And since then, the intelligence told us that all the hostages were brought back down to the tunnels. And since then, we get nothing. We have no news.
And you mentioned Guy's older brother, Gal. From what I understand, they were both at the Nova Festival that day. Gal managed to escape. Can you walk us through that day, what you've learned from that day and of Guy's abduction?
Yes, Guy went to 3 of his best friends, childhood friends. They were together from the kindergarten, and they grew up together and all these years, and they went together to the music festival. My older son, Gal, was not supposed to be there at all because he was in another party of a friend that is going to get married. And about 5 o'clock in the morning, he called his brother and he told him that it's very fun there and he should come. And the guy arrived to the music festival at 6 o'clock in the morning. At about 6:15, they both took a selfie of themselves in the festival, smiling and having the best time of their lives. And 15 minutes later, hell began there and missiles started to fly over their heads. They came in different cars, so they both walked to the cars to come home. They ended up in this dead traffic jam in the exit from the music festival, where the terrorists started to shoot everybody and kill them in the cars. And there was a great panic started there. And they got out of their cars and ran to different directions. And Gal, my older son, he escaped and ran for over 10 hours, 10 horrible hours in the fields, seeing atrocities around him, and eventually was rescued by Israeli security forces to the closest police station, and from there we took him home. Guy did not have this luck. He and his friends probably ran to the other side, and and since then we didn't hear from him because we didn't have any contact with him because maybe he lost his phone or something. At about 11:30, at the same October 7, Hamas released the footage, the first video of hostages already inside Gaza, in a dark room, handcuffs, frightened and in shock. And the terrorist is moving on around them with a flashlight and asking them to say something. This is how we learned that guy is it was a hostage and is in Gaza. And in this time, Gal was already in the fields. So I didn't tell him anything about his brother until he got back home. And when he heard it, it was quite a shock.
Imaginable story. And Ilan, today, 1 year later, if you could send a message to Guy, if you could tell him something today, what would you tell him?
I would just tell him to stay strong, to hang in there, because I know that it's very, very, very hard to live in this condition. But I know he's a strong young man, and I believe in him. And I'm confident that soon enough we'll be together and we'll hug him and we'll love him so much and miss him so much. And everybody is waiting for him. And don't break your spirit. Just hang in there. Be strong. We love you.
Ilan, thank you so much for joining us today. Our thoughts are with your family, with Guy, with the rest of the hostages, and we pray for their safe return. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
We opened today with the grim news of yet another terror attack in Israel. 9 people were injured when a terrorist went on a stabbing spree in multiple locations in Hadera earlier today. The injured were evacuated to the hospital for treatment, and the suspect, who was later identified as Ahmed Jaberin, a 36-year-old from Al-Fahim, was neutralized by security forces. Several hours later, a barrage of rockets from Lebanon struck the north in Kiryat Shmona, killing 2 Israelis in the afternoon in a direct hit. In contrast to what we saw in France on October 7th, nearly 4,000 supporters of Israel from 27 cities across Finland marched to counter the anti-Israel protests and honor the victims of the Hamas massacre and ongoing war. The demonstrations were organized by the Israel Friendship Committee in Finland, representing 20 pro-Israel Jewish and Christian groups. Speakers included parliament members, professors, and volunteers from the Hostages and Missing Families Forum. The event went smoothly, with only one minor incident when a young immigrant attempted to attack a journalist but was arrested by the police. Risto Huvila, chair of the Federation of Finland-Israel Associations, told ILTV this marked the first time such a pro-Israel event received mainstream media coverage, even leading the evening news on Finland's top TV channel, TV1.
For more of the latest updates from Israel, make sure to subscribe to our newsletter at iltv.tv or download the ILTV Plus app. That's it for ILTV's weekly review. Stay safe and see you next week.